Hello and welcome to today's video. We're going to be going over arrays and briefly objects. This will become apparent later in the video. I have an introductory series on programming basics that covers arrays. I will add a link to that in the description as well as a little card in the top. But just as a quick recap, arrays in JavaScript are an indexed set of items. These items can be strings, numbers, other arrays, or even objects. So why would you want to use arrays? Well, let's say you are working on a game and you want to keep track of the cars a player has bought. Instead of creating a variable for each card like the below, so as you can see here, we have let car 1 equals a Nissan Silvia S13, car 2 BMW E36, and car 3 Toyota AE86. What you can instead do is create an array like this instead. So as you can see, we have const r cars equals a Nissan Silvia S13, BMW E36, and Toyota AE86. Okay, but what do all these new things mean? First, we have r cars. This is just the name of the array. Then we use the equals operator and then the square bracket. Now the square bracket is where the magic happens. Essentially everything after the square bracket is going to be inside the array. So as you can see here, we have a string Nissan Silvia S13. Then you'll notice that we have a comma, and then the next car, and then a comma, and the next car. So each item that you'd like to add into this array, you just need to add a comma after it, and then you can add an array item. Now, just to note, there are two ways of creating arrays. First, you can say const r new cars equals new array and then the parentheses. So this tells you that this is a function or a method. Next, you can say const r empty array equals and then just square brackets. So both of these essentially do the same thing and they are both equally valid. Both of these are doing the same thing. When using the new keyword in JavaScript, we are creating a new object. And here is where we briefly go over the difference between an array and an object. An array, as mentioned, is an indexed list of items, whereas an object is a named list of items. So if you just want to keep track of a basic list of things, you definitely want to use arrays. If you want to keep track of complex relations and a lot of properties for different things, generally you'll want to use an object. So what exactly does an object look like? So here you can see an example of an object. So we have const object list. We use the assignment operator as normal. The first difference you'll see is that we are using curly braces and not the square brackets. So curly braces essentially now signifies that we are looking at an object. Next up, what you'll notice is that we have a property name first. So in this case, we are saying prop brand, and instead of equals, we use the double dot separator and then give it a name. So in this case, Nissan is the brand and AE86 is going to be the model. Now, if I don't want to keep track of all of that information, I just wanted a simple list of the cars, we'd do it exactly like we did before, where we just declare the array and then put the individual items inside of it, mint. Now let's start doing some things to our arrays. We will use the above as the example array. But first of all, let's say that we want to print out BMW E36. So this, we're going to have to check what index it's in, and as we can see, this is going to be index 0. Just a reminder again, JavaScript starts counting from 0 and not 1. So in that case, BMW E36 is going to be of index 1. Okay, so we've added the code console.log and then r cars with index of 1. If we now save this, you'll notice that we now get BMW E36. So in this case, we've used console.log to print to the console. Then we've specified the array, and in this case, that is r cars. Then we use the square bracket notation just to signify that we want this specific index in this specific array. So in this case, it's just 1. Okay, that's cool and all. Now let's say I don't want it to be an E36 anymore, but I want to change it to E46. How do we change that specific element? Well, all we need to do is specify the array, and in this case it's our cars, which index, that's going to be index 1 for the second item, and then we can just say equals and then whatever we want it to be. So in this case we can see it actually is BMW E36, but we're overwriting it over here, and then we're going to console.log it over here. So if I now save this, you'll see that it changes to BMW E46. Okay, now let's say that we want to print just the whole array as is. We can just remove that and put in our cars, and if we click save, we'll now notice that it prints out all 3 items automatically. Okay, but you will notice that we now have this little drop down here as well, and it gives you the index and then the item for all of them. But let's say that we wanted to just print a string of all the entries that we have. All we would need to do is just add the method .toString. So if we now save this, you'll notice that we get a neat little string with all of our items in, and they are automatically separated with commas. Now, as mentioned previously, array items can also be objects. So you can have a function as an array entry, or a date, or even another array. So let's look at some examples. Firstly, I've created a function here just called func say hello, and all it does is return the string hi. Then we'll see I've created an array here called rShowcase. And as we see, we're using the square brackets, and so that means that all the items in here are going to be array items. So first of all, we have date.now with parentheses, meaning this is a method. Then on the next line, we can see func say hello with our little parentheses. And then lastly, we can see we've got square brackets, which means we've now got an array inside an array. Much like exhibit, yo dog, we heard you like arrays, so we put some arrays inside your arrays. Terrible joke, I know. Anyway, now let's see how all of these actually work. So below here we can see that we've got console.log rShowcase, and then we have 0. So that would be index 1. So if we now save this, you'll see it gives us this whack-ass number. Essentially what that number is the Unix time. So that is the number of seconds that's passed since 1970, the 1st of January, I believe. Cool, very interesting. Now with the next one, we're going to be looking at the second item, and that is our function. Now keep in mind that we are using console.log, hence that's why we are only returning this string. So if we save, now see it says hi. Interesting. Same with the last one. If we just hit save, you'll see it just prints out the whole array. So now we're going to get into the slightly more complex stuff, but before we get there, there are 3 things you need to know. So first thing is, how do we always get the first item in an array? Well, what we can do is if we just put console.log, we give it the array and then the specified index. So if we now save, you'll see that we get Nissan Silvia S13. That is this item right here. Okay, rad. Now how do we return the last item? Well, in this case it's easy. There are only 3 items, so you would assume we can just give it the index of 2. So if we do that and we save, indeed, we get Toyota AE86. But what if you don't know the length of the array? Well, this is where the other thing comes into play. To get the last item in an array, we can use one of the built-in properties of arrays, namely the length property. This will tell us exactly how many items are in the array. Now please note it gives the number of items, not the last index of an array. Now again, just to show you what I'm talking about, if we say .length over here and hit save, you'll see that we get 3 items. However, the last index is 2. In order to get the last item in this array, all we need to do is provide it with the array. Then we use the array length function and just -1. That will give us the actual index of the last item. So if we now save, you'll see it prints out Toyota AE86. Cool. So now we know, regardless of the length of the array, you can always get the last item. Unless your array is empty, in which case you will get all kinds of fun little errors. Now let's say that you wanted to print out all the items in this array on a new line. well, you could say console.log or cars index 0, index 1, and index 2. And if we save that, indeed, we will get each item on a new line. Yeah, this is not a good way of doing it, definitely, especially if we have, thousands of items. Now we will introduce a built-in JavaScript function. You are going to get very familiar with this function because it is going to be used everywhere, all the time, and you will dream of this function. And what is this magical function? It's the for loop. And what does this magical for loop do? Well, it takes in the array, iterates over each item, and prints it out. So if we hit save, you will notice that nothing changed. That's because it's doing exactly the same thing as we did before, but automatically. We don't have to do all of that extra nonsense. Anyway, let's break this down. First, we have the for keyword. This is essentially just starting the function. Then we have the parentheses, so inside here we're going to have all the arguments. Now a for loop requires 3 arguments. First we have the iterator. Now this is just a coding law, you always have to use I. That's just a joke. You can use any character that you want, however some code law somewhere states that everybody always uses I, so we use I. So all we're saying is that I equals 0. Because remember, JavaScript starts counting in 0. And you're going to get tired of me saying that every time, but trust me, you need to get this ingrained in your brain because you will come up against an error with this all the time. The next section over here is the condition. So this is what it is checked before it runs the code inside here every time. So here we can say I is smaller than array cars.length. So that's this array. Since there are 3 items, it will check on each iteration, is I smaller than 3. Next we just have the iteration. So in this case all we're doing is saying I++. All that means is we are adding 1 to I on each consecutive loop. And then we are saying console.log array cars I. So as you can see, what it does is we start with index 0 and then it prints out this. Then on the next iteration it goes cool, add 1 to I, we now have 1. Then print out BMW. Then it goes again, plus 1. We now have I as being 2, so it prints out Toyota AE86. And then plus 1. Then it goes again and it checks, cool, is I smaller than array of cars.length? No, it isn't, and it exits out, and thus we get this beautiful result over here. Cool, so now we know how to do some basic stuff with arrays. Now let's say that you wanted to add items to the array. How would we go about this? There are many different ways to add items to the arrays, but we're just going to go over some very basic ones. If you want to add an item to an array, you can do this by specifying the index. So in our list, we know that index 3 would be the first index that is open. So in this case, you can say our cars index 3 equals Mercedes. If we hit save, you'll now see that our array's length has increased to 4, and index 3 we now have Mercedes. Okay, this works very well in this case, but we have a very short array. But now I've changed the index to 10. And let's see what happens. If we open this up, we'll see that our length is now 11, but there are multiple undefined indexes that are missing from this. So as you can see, this is not the best way of doing this, and instead we can use a array function. So what we have here is array cars.push. The function push just adds an item to the end of an array. So in this case, Nissan R32, and as you can see, index 3, we now have Nissan R32. Cool. So now let's say that we wanted to remove the last item in an array. So in this case, all we have to do is just remove that, and instead of push, we say pop. So now we will have 3 items in this array. So the Nissan Silvia S13, the BMW E36, and the Toyota AE86. So if we now hit save, you'll notice that the array length is now 2 and the Toyota is no longer here. Now that we've taken the pop function and put it inside the console.log instead of just printing the array, you'll notice something interesting. The pop function actually does two things. First, it removes the last item in the array. Secondly, it will actually print out or return the value of whatever that index was. And that's it for arrays in today's video. Next week we will go over some more methods with arrays. Just a thank you to everybody for the support. I appreciate the feedback and support. If you have any questions or would like to go over a particular topic or language, feel free to comment down below. And as always, you have leveled up in programming. Hope to see you in the next week's video.